welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur. Having fun today talking about the federal election once again. Why do Canadians seem to like Mark Carney so much? I think I'll just throw that out there. Is he any different than Trudeau? Okay. Will Pierre Poilievre make life more affordable for the average Joe, for the working Canadians? Okay. Let's chat about that today. Our guest, Leighton Grey. I always love having Leighton on. He's one of my favorite guests, very knowledgeable and just passionate about what he believes in. He's one of Canada's top attorneys and also the host of the Grey Matter podcast and television show. You see that on Miracle Channel, returntoreason.com, and you can check out his social media on X at Grey Matter Convo. So Leighton, thanks for making time for us here today.
That's always a privilege to be with you, Paul.
Always fun, yeah. Hey, why don't we start with... should we believe the polls, right? Again, a lot of people still scratching their heads on these, right? We've gone from like a 20-point conservative lead, right? Not that long ago to now, I think last week it was like 8 or 9% lead for the Liberals. And this week it's tightened some. I think it's only a 5-point lead. What's up with that? Any thoughts?
Well, it's difficult to say, although I must say that there seems to be a parallel between what happened last summer in the U.S. presidential election, where we saw many times at certain points Kamala Harris was either neck and neck or ahead of Donald Trump in the polls, and yet she would have rallies where the turnout would be, let's say, rather suspect. Certainly nothing like the crowds that Donald Trump was getting. Mm-hmm. And based on what's been reported and what I've seen on social media, we have a very, very similar pattern in Canada in that the poll numbers for Mark Carney look very, very good. In fact, one actually had him projected as a 71% likelihood of becoming prime minister again with a majority government. But then when you look at his rallies and things like that, they're very sparsely attended. Meanwhile, his opponent is playing to massive crowds. In fact, he's going to be in front of a crowd in Edmonton in the next couple of days that is expected to be larger than ever.
We're talking like really 5,000-6,000 people coming out, right? As compared to a few hundred. Yeah, it's massive.
Yes. So there's an incongruity there that sort of makes you wonder, who is being polled, who's doing the poll. You have to ask all these questions now. We can't have the same sort of blind faith in polls that we used to have with, Ipsos Reid or Gallup back in the day.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I don't know if you caught this. I think it was Juno News that did a poll that was asking voters who are your neighbors voting for. Really interesting approach. They've done this in European countries as well. And the theory behind this, I think, is that they're shy conservatives, right? We have all this mainstream media kind of propaganda, if I can use that term. You don't want to be seen as somebody who's supporting, somebody who's right wing, right? My neighbors might think very highly of me, that sort of thing, right? So you want to stay under the radar a little bit, right? So maybe we don't answer the poll as truthfully as we might want to. So when they ask the neighbors who you're going to vote for, it switched around to a plus, like the conservatives were ahead by 4 points. Really interesting. I'm
Which is a lot.
It is. It's a huge switch. So, I'm not sure, how much weight to put in that, but it's very thought-provoking anyway.
Yeah, it's. I guess what we have is we have a very closely contested election, depending on who you ask. I think it is going to be a close call. I think the Liberals have benefited most from the complete disintegration of the NDP, which really was somewhat predictable given the really incompetent leadership of Jagmeet Singh.
Well, that was going to be my question for you. What happened with Jagmeet Singh? What has he done to totally drop the ball here? I mean, it looks horrible for them right now. Is there something he could do to change? I mean, that's not very helpful for the Conservatives either.
Well, there's a long story and a short story. The short story is he isn't a very likable character. He's not. I don't think he's very articulate. I don't think that he has a great deal of integrity with Canadians right now, given his flip-flop over, at various times saying that he was going to, he was going to cause a non-confidence and he would flip-flop on this and that.
Right.
And but I think that the main problem that the NDP has, frankly, is the big picture is that the Liberal Party, which used to be a left of center centrist party, has
Hmm.
drifted so far to the left ideologically that
Right.
really the whole raison d'etre of the NDP has come into question. And so I think a lot of people who were NDP voters and supporters are looking at the NDP and wondering, well, why would I put my vote there when I could vote for the Liberals and actually have someone who's in government and who's in power? So I think
Hmm.
it's really the Liberal Party of Canada, and I think by design that's taken apart the NDP, because I don't think Mark Carney wants to have to go hat in hand to Jagmeet Singh the way Justin Trudeau did many times
Yeah.
during his last two sort of mandates, when we had a very
Hmm.
bare minority that was held together sort of with bubble gum with this NDP coalition.
Okay. Well, we should touch base on the news as of the time of this taping, anyway, April 7th, right? The Chinese looks like they've been caught meddling in our election here again, right? So, and again, I'm not sure that all the mainstream media are actually carrying this. I saw this in the National Post, I believe it was. So what's happening there? Is there some pretty hard evidence here that this is happening, and is there any link directly to the Liberal Party of being involved in this?
Yes, well, for the third consecutive time in a general election now, it's our 45th general election in Canada. We have proof of Chinese interference. Sadly, the Liberals really suppressed and prevented proper investigation of what happened in the previous two elections. But we can be pretty certain that the Chinese interfered in the last two general elections on behalf of the Liberals. And then today there was an announcement by a very respected a watchdog group that said that a social media platform called WeChat, it was discovered there that the CCP had been influencing there, especially Chinese Canadians and Chinese Canadian voters who have become a large contingent of voters in Canada. The promoting Mark Carney as a candidate, uh, sort of buffing up his policies in relation to the United States, and promoting him as a candidate in preference to his chief opponent, that's the CPC. And this goes all the way and is linked to the Liberal Party of Canada. In fact, they were briefed on it by government watchdogs. And of course, what's telling about this is it wasn't the Liberal Party of Canada that revealed this to us. It was this watchdog group. And unfortunately, this is something that Canadians need to be very much concerned about, is the increasing Chinese influence, not only in our politics, but in many of our government institutions, including media. And of course, this adds on to the whole scandal involving a Liberal candidate who sort of put out a bounty on his opponent. And that the Chinese
Right.
picked up. The Chinese picked that up, and were going to actually enforce it. And there's a scandal now where that candidate had to resign. And so we see sort of the color red that's in the Liberal Party is also echoed in the CCP, and we wonder how close that is. And we also beg the question of, could this be why, or part of the reason why, Donald Trump and the Americans are so interested all of a sudden in the domestic politics of Canada?
Oh, wow, that is interesting. Yeah, because again, Trump is on record as saying he'd prefer dealing with Mark Carney. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And why is the Chinese Communist Party wanting to have Mark Carney in power?
Mm-hmm.
We should all be asking those questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, any thoughts?
Well, I think it ties into what's happening. And by the way, another big scandal that's happening right now is the World Economic Forum, where Klaus Schwab has been
Right.
completely outed. There's deep connection between the World Economic Forum and the CCP, as everyone should know. And
Hmm.
of course, Mark Carney is an acolyte, a disciple of the World Economic Forum. He
Right.
comes right out of that whole group. But this is a question. Why would Donald Trump say that? Well, perhaps he's very interested in the continued disintegration of Canadian sovereignty. That seems to be what the Trudeau Liberals are about. What Mark Carney is going to continue, if you believe what he said in his 2021 book called Values, where he essentially said that the government's role is to take our
Hmm.
freedoms and to protect us from the evils of capitalism, through net zero ideology. Basically, it's the old,
Well,
Agenda 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. But, there was another story that broke out that was very interesting about this, which predicted that in the aftermath of the election, if Carney wins, that he would completely fold, completely cave on the whole, situation with the U.S., much like Keir Starmer has done in Great Britain. And so what's interesting is, the allegations essentially that the Liberals are using their spike in popularity by paying off of Donald Trump to gain some height in the polls, but then afterwards, after the election's over, that they'll essentially cave into the Americans on a lot of economic policy, and that might be
so
what Donald Trump is thinking.
bait and switch.
Yeah.
Switch. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. I mean, because we're hearing, of course, from all our federal leaders, I think, that, okay, we need to protect Canadian sovereignty, but do we need to protect it from Trump or from our own leaders? Interesting. And in particular
Yes.
here with Mark Carney, because of his ties with WEF ideology, right? I mean, it's all
Yes.
about globalism and
Yeah.
much less about a nation's sovereignty. So that would be something to think about here for sure, because I mean, do we know who Mark Carney is? We don't know a lot about him, but of course, read the book and you'll certainly learn some things about him, because he's written, this is who I am, these are my values, right? So I'm wondering if this will hurt him at some point here, especially these Chinese interference allegations and so forth. So yeah. I guess time will tell here.
Yes.
So, in fact, actually, I'm wondering to what degree the upcoming leadership debates are going to affect voters. I think this could. I mean, often it's a leadership debate, nothing changes. This one here in particular coming up, I'm just thinking this could be pretty big. Now, this is going to come up, of course, I would imagine, in any kind of the free debate part, as the Chinese interference allegations. So, and we all know how good Pierre Poilievre, don't care what background you're from or who you vote for, we all have to admit he's a good debater. I think the only thing he has to watch out for is that he doesn't come across as being smug and, hey, I'm better than you sort of thing, right?
Well, there's no question he's one of the best orators of his generation in terms of Canadian politics, and he excels very much in question period. He was a rock star. The real concern I have about the debates is if they fall into the same trap that happened in the United States, where essentially the control of the debates was exercised by the moderators.
Yeah.
Really, very much controlling the narrative, picking the questions, and that would be to the great dismay of Canadians, because what we saw in the debate, particularly between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, was a very one-sided situation, where Kamala was given softball questions and was given more opportunities than Donald Trump was, in a lot of ways, sort of masked. But then who knows? The one thing that we can be sure of with Mark Carney is that politically he's a neophyte. This is a man who hasn't even been elected to the post of local dog catcher. He has no experience here. Even though he's not a young man, I think he's in his early 60s or late 50s. He's not a political expert here. He's not a veteran like his opponent is. His opponent has been in public life since his early 20s. He flourishes in these environments. So I agree with you that those debates could be very revealing about who's a more fit leader. But I'm concerned about. I think Carney's going to get a lot of help, particularly if CBC is controlling that what we see and hear in that environment.
Yeah, we'll have to watch for that. How is this whole thing being framed? What kind of questions are being posed? Is it slanted to one side or the other? Interesting and somewhat controversial promise from Pierre Poilievre, and that is to massively cut foreign aid. And now his argument is that our foreign aid, and we give a lot to other nations around the world, it's often going to untrustworthy places and people. And I would have to agree. I mean, yes, there's some that are doing some really good things. So I get it. We shouldn't be cutting all of our foreign aid, but should we cut it significantly, especially if it's going to questionable places? right? I
Uh,
mean, yeah, that makes sense to me. And instead, use some of that money to protect our Arctic, which is a key issue and should be an election issue here. On the flip side, I think we're hearing from other, federal parties saying, well, no, Canada needs to be compassionate to needy countries, and that's true as well. But where's the right balance? Your
yes.
thoughts on that?
Well, I appreciate what he's saying. However, uh, to my mind, the biggest and most questionable foreign aid that Canada has provided recently is to the Ukraine proxy war, and
Mm.
Canada has been very, very faithful to Mr. Zelensky,
Hmm.
and Mr. Poilievre has joined in that. He's never said that in fact, he's pledged to continuing support to Zelensky in that vein, and so that's of concern to me.
Mm.
I do like what I hear from him and his party in terms of trying to reduce some public spending. But what I haven't heard from him, and what I think we really need to hear, is the biggest problem that we have right now in this country is we have just a massive public service. We have one federal government employee for every 90 Canadians. Just
Yeah.
drink that in for a second. One government employee for every 90 Canadians. The biggest thing that
Wow.
anybody needs to do, whether it's Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre, what they're going to have to do, I think, unavoidably, is cut the size of that public service in the same way that Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin did in the early 1990s.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like the Liberals, you have to admit Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin were very fiscally responsible, and they did a lot of good when they took over from the Mulroney government in terms of
Yeah.
cutting spending. And
Yeah.
that's the type of thing I think that is the reality. That's the bald reality that our next prime minister is going to have to face. And the real problem we have today is that because of Trudeau's disastrous economic policies, that's driven out a lot of investment. So there aren't a
Mm.
lot of private sector jobs. And so this bloated public sector is sort of masking the reality that we have in Canada. And that is that we should be facing significant unemployment from loss of private sector jobs. And this is being veiled by the fact that we have this bloated public service. But there are a lot of people in public service that, frankly, we don't need, and we really need to cut the size of that public service. And I think that's the biggest key to
Yeah.
reducing our costs and also reducing our accumulating national debt.
I
As
think you've hit the nail on the head. And you mentioned national debt. I have heard. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I haven't heard a lot from our leaders in this election about reducing the national debt. It's
yeah,
huge.
yeah,
I mean, can we continue on this way? I don't think
no.
so. None of our kids and grandkids and great grandkids and maybe great great grandkids have anything to say about it.
I quite agree. And, we should be concerned also about our plummeting GDP. I believe we're last in the
Mm.
G20 right now in terms of GDP
Wow.
growth.
Okay.
And, really, there's a very simple fix to this, and that is we have to reduce the red tape. We have to get investment, not only foreign investment, but Canadians investing in Canada again. And of course, the CPC has been encouraging that. That's one of their policies. But of course, that's the big key is we've got to do some work sort of rehabilitating our economy here, becoming less reliant on the United States. But I think the big key for Canada is to get people working again and to grow our economy. That's something that the Liberals did just a terrible, terrible job at. And that's going to be one of the biggest jobs of the next person who takes over. Of course, Mark Carney is not going to do anything about that. He said that he's going to continue the policies of Justin Trudeau into the next phase, taking us down all the way into net zero, which is really code for national economic disaster. To
Mm.
the point where we're going to have things like food crises and energy crises in Canada, despite the fact that we are such an energy rich and food rich country in so many ways. Canada truly blessed Canada like no other country in the world. God has blessed this country with natural resources, and yet it seems that our government does not want us to be able to reap and harvest them for our own good or for the benefit of the world. It's
Well,
really a strange situation to
I'm
observe.
glad you brought that up because, I mean, it seems to me that the Canadian public has done a bit of a switcheroo on this whole, fossil fuel thing. We're starting to realize that You know, it might be a good idea, and in fact, quite necessary to actually build pipelines and to
Mhm.
actually extract oil, natural gas, etc., from the ground and
Mhm.
to ship it to other nations where they really need it. And this will be good for our country, good for our economy. Now, we're having the federal leaders, at least to varying degrees, agreeing that, hey, you know, maybe building pipelines, even coast to coast pipelines, would be a necessary and good thing. But when it comes to just think this through, let's look at past track records. Let's look at books that have been written. Here's my values.
Yeah.
Okay, who do we actually trust? Who's most likely to follow through on that once they're elected to build those pipelines?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, this is a great point. In fact, there's a wonderful book that I recommend to your viewers and listeners
Okay.
by Conrad Black. It's called The Canadian Manifesto. It's written in 2018. And one of the things that it's an optimistic book about Canada, which is hard to find these days. But he said something really that really struck me, and I think is very true, is that Canadians are big thinkers. You know, we like to do big things. Our country was really founded initially on the construction of national railways that
Mm.
went from coast to coast,
Right.
and so this idea of building pipelines is sort of fits into this big broad sort of Gordon Lightfoot lyric grand narrative. And I think if we could get into building big projects, you know, we used to host Olympics in Montreal and
Yeah.
Calgary and Vancouver, where you know Canadians love doing big things. We're a big country. We can build big things. We're an industrious people. We're hardworking people. We're smart. We can do these things, and I think if we could get building things like like pipelines and other types of infrastructure, that type of an investment in our own country, I think would be not only a great economic boost, but also a great morale boost to the country. There's a
Hmm.
great sort of inspiring impact, a residual effect of these grand narratives that I think have been really missing in Canada, particularly in the Trudeau era, you know, which was so dark ideologically. You know, this prime minister telling us basically we're bad people, we're colonists, we stole all the land and we burn too much
Oh,
fossil fuel, and you know we're terrible people, and of course we're a post nation state. We don't have any core values, which is a lot of
oh,
rubbish, as we know. But to hear those things and have that reinforced year after year and through three successive federal elections, I think has brought a great pall and despair over the country. And I think
hmm.
engaging in some of these big projects, I think, would do a lot to maybe overcome that.
Well, we start to believe those things, and we get told those same lies essentially over and over again. After a while, we
Yes.
start to believe it's true. We're bad
Yes.
people as Canadians? Really? No, I'd say on the world stage, we're pretty darn good,
Yeah.
even historically speaking, right?
Yeah.
And something else that's happening in this election, very, I think, unprecedented as far as I can see, seniors are voting for the Liberals. And young
Yes.
people are voting for the Conservatives. What is happening in our world? It seems like upside down. What normally happens. My guess is that has a lot to do with the affordability issue and the housing crisis. Young people, I'm hearing them. I've had conversations with them. They're going, "I'll never be able to have a house."
Right.
What
Right.
do you say? Yeah, yeah, looks like it. Yep.
Well, unfortunately, we seem to be the first generation of Canadians that where our young people cannot look forward to or even dream about
Hmm.
doing better than their parents. And so the boomers, these are people who, by and large, are no longer working and are living in retirement. They have their money, they have their retirement savings, and so they like a broad and generous social welfare net. These ideas sound good, but of course, all of that goes on the backs of the people who are working and who are being
Yep.
taxed. There's no such thing as a free lunch. We know this. There's no such thing as a free program. Somebody has to pay, and I think unfortunately our young people are paying far too much, and of course their parents and grandparents haven't done enough to do maybe the most important job that they could have done, and that is to create opportunity, create an environment, create a society in which young people have hope and they have dreams and they have aspirations and they have the ambition and the belief and the dream that they could actually make something of themselves and be the best versions of themselves. God tells us repeatedly, He's a God of abundance. Be fruitful and multiply. Well, it's hard to be fruitful and multiply when the fruits of your labor are being taken by somebody else. When you have to work to support somebody else, a stranger, on one view of the matter, that's called slavery. And I think to a large degree, that's what's happening to our younger generations. They're being enslaved. Their work is being stolen. The fruits of their labor are being stolen to support a geriatric class. And that's why they like the liberals. And that's the best explanation.
Yeah, no, that's some very interesting thoughts to ponder here for our viewers. Thank you for sharing that, Leighton. I'd like to ask you this, and I'll probably keep asking this throughout the election cycle here. What should voters be looking for in a prime minister? Okay, what kind of character qualities should we be looking for?
Well, I think the one thing that I haven't seen from a leader that I would like to see is I'd like to see God brought into the conversation. This is one of the wonderful things that happened last year in the American election campaign, where the Republicans talked about God. J.D. Vance has been on national television quoting Thomas Aquinas. This is something that no Canadian leader, including the candidates for prime minister, have been prepared to do. I think they bought into this idea that Canada is a secular, polyethnic society, and I don't think that's true. I don't think that's an accurate characterization. I think that's a misunderstanding of Canada.
We'll have to leave it there because of the clock. But Leighton, thank you for bringing that up. I agree. We desperately need God in this nation.
Yeah.
All right, Leighton Grey, returntoreason.com, host of the Grey Matter podcast television show, X at Grey Matter Convo. And thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe at WizeUp.ca.